They called her Frankenstein while she poured their coffee. They laughed at the scars crawling up her neck while she smiled and nodded. What they didn't know, what none of them could see beneath those long sleeves and that quiet dignity, was that those scars told a story of heroism most of them would never understand. But when one man walked through that diner door and recognized the faded ink above her wrist, everything changed. Stay with me until the end and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning sun hadn't yet burned the chill off the West Texas plains when Lena Torres pushed through the back door of the Red Star Diner, her boots hitting the cracked linoleum with the same rhythm they had for 3 years running. 5:45 a.m. The coffee maker gurgled to life under her practiced hands, and she moved through the opening routine with the precision of someone who'd learned long ago that routine was armor, predictable, safe, controllable. She tied her apron tight, pulled her sleeves down past her wrists, and checked her reflection in the stainless steel coffee urn. The scars that crawled up the left side of her neck disappearing into her hairline caught the fluorescent light. She didn't flinch anymore, didn't smooth them or try to hide them beyond what long sleeves and a high collar could manage. They were simply part of the landscape now, like the mesquite and scrub brush that lined Highway 87 outside. "Morning, Lena." May Delgado, the diner's owner, emerged from the office with a clipboard and reading glasses perched on her nose. 60-something compact, with steel gray hair, pulled into a practical bun. May had the kind of face that looked like it had weathered every storm Texas could throw at it and come out tougher for it. "Morning, May. Table 6 has a wobbly leg again. I've got duct tape in the back. I'll handle it." May paused, studying her through those bifocals. "Pipeline crews coming in today. Chad Pike already called ahead for their usual corner booth." Lena's hands didn't stop wiping down the counter, but something tightened in her shoulders. "Understood. You want me to—" "I'm fine, May. It's nothing I haven't handled before." May's mouth pressed into a thin line, but she nodded. They both knew what handled before meant. 3 years of comments that ranged from curious whispers to outright cruelty, all absorbed with the same neutral expression Lena wore now. May had offered to ban the worst offenders more than once, but Lena had always declined. She didn't need defending, didn't want the attention that came with it. The regulars started filtering in around 6. Hank Morrison, the retired postal worker, who ordered 2 eggs over easy and wheat toast, no butter. The Sandoval brothers, who ran cattle on the spread north of town and smelled like leather and hay. Old Mrs. Chen, who'd lost her husband last spring and now took her coffee black at the corner table, staring out at the highway like she was waiting for him to drive up. Lena knew all their orders by heart, knew that Hank's hands shook a little more each month, that the younger Sandoval brother was sweet on the girl who worked at the feed store, that Mrs. Chen never left a tip, but always whispered, "Thank you," in Mandarin, when Lena refilled her cup. She knew them, but they didn't know her. Not really. And that was how she preferred it. The pipeline crew arrived at 7:30, their boots thundering across the floor like a small stampede. 8 men, all wearing the same company logo on their shirts, all carrying the particular swagger of guys who worked hard, played harder, and believed the world owed them deference for both. Chad Pike led the pack, tall, broad-shouldered, with a sunburn that never seemed to fade, and eyes that cataloged everything, like he was constantly calculating what he could take and what he could get away with. His crew fanned out behind him, already loud, already taking up more space than they needed. "Well, well," Chad drawled, as they settled into their corner booth. "Look who's working today, boys. It's our favorite horror movie extra." The laughter came quick and sharp. Lena felt it like a slap, but kept her expression neutral as she approached their table, order pad ready. "Morning, gentlemen. What can I get you?" How about a paper bag for that face? One of the younger guys, Brock she thought his name was, snickered into his menu. Coffee all around, Chad said, leaning back with his arms spread wide across the booth's back. And bring extra creamer, unless you're going to tell us that's against regulation, Scarface. Her pen didn't waver on the pad. Coffee, extra creamer. Anything else? Yeah. Brock leaned forward. Where'd you get all that gnarly shit meth lab blow up on you? The table erupted. Even the ones who hadn't said anything were grinning, watching her face for a reaction. She gave them nothing. Just stood there with her pen poised, waiting. Chad's grin widened. She doesn't talk much, boys. Maybe the fire got her vocal cords too. What do you think? Does Frankenstein's monster have a voice? Or does she just grunt? I'll be back with your coffee, Lena said evenly, turning away. That's right, shuffle on back, Monster Mash. And don't breathe on the food, might contaminate it. The walk back to the coffee station felt longer than it should have. She could feel eyes on her, not just the crews, but the other customers. Hank Morrison stared hard at his eggs. The Sandoval brothers suddenly found their phones fascinating. Mrs. Chen looked out the window. No one said anything. They never did. Lena poured 8 cups of coffee with steady hands, arranged them on a tray with the creamer, and brought them back. The comments continued, something about Halloween coming early, a joke about burn victims she didn't quite catch over their laughter. She distributed the cups, took their food orders, and walked away. This was the job. This was Tuesday. At 8:15, the bell above the door chimed, and a man walked in who didn't fit the usual pattern. Military bearing, you could see it in the way he carried himself, even before you noticed the high and tight haircut, or the way his eyes swept the room with practiced assessment. Early 40s maybe, with the kind of weathered face that spoke of years spent squinting into hostile suns. He wore civilian clothes, jeans, a plain gray t-shirt, worn boots, but the way he moved marked him as clearly as a uniform would have. He chose a seat at the counter away from the crowd and set a worn canvas bag on the stool beside him. Lena approached with a menu and water glass. Coffee, please. His voice was gravelly, tired. Black. She poured, and he wrapped both hands around the mug like he was trying to absorb its warmth. His eyes flicked up, briefly caught the scars on her neck, then immediately away, not in disgust or shock, but in the careful neutrality of someone who'd seen trauma before and knew better than to stare. You ready to order, or do you need a minute? Give me a minute. She moved away, refilled Mrs. Chen's cup, delivered the pipeline crew's food to a chorus of fresh comments about whether she'd washed her hands, and came back to find the man at the counter, still staring at his menu without really seeing it. Rough morning, she asked, pen ready. Rough decade. He said it like a joke that wasn't funny. I'll take the number 3, scrambled wheat toast. She wrote it down, started to turn away, then stopped when he spoke again. You former military? The question landed like a stone in still water. Lena's hand tightened on her order pad. Why do you ask? He gestured vaguely at her posture, the way she held herself. Just the way you move, efficient, alert, reminds me of... He stopped himself. Never mind, forget I asked. But something in his face had changed. Not suspicion exactly, more like recognition trying to surface. Before she could respond, chaos erupted from the corner booth. Oh Jesus, she actually touched my plate. Brock shoved his breakfast away dramatically. I can't eat this. Look at those hands, they're like something out of a zombie movie. Maybe if we're lucky she'll fall apart before she comes back, another voice added. Leave an arm on the table. The laughter was louder now, emboldened by the lack of response from anyone else in the diner. Chad Pike caught Lena's eye across the room and grinned, raising his coffee cup in a mock toast. The man at the counter had gone very still. His jaw was tight, his knuckles white around his coffee mug. That happened a lot, he asked quietly, not looking at her. Doesn't matter. Lena's voice was flat. Your order will be up in a few minutes. She delivered it to the kitchen window and busied herself with other tables, but she could feel the tension radiating from the counter. The man hadn't touched his coffee. He was watching the corner booth with a kind of focused attention that preceded action. Don't, she thought. Don't make this a thing. When his food came up, she brought it over and set it down carefully. Here you go. Anything else I can... He was looking at her arm, specifically at the place where her left sleeve had ridden up slightly while she carried the plate, exposing 3 inches of scarred skin, and his eyes locked on something. A fragment of faded ink, mostly obscured by the burned tissue, but just visible enough part of a numerical sequence, and what might have been a sword or bayonet. The blood drained from his face. That tattoo, he said slowly. Is that... He stopped, swallowed hard. 3rd Battalion. Lena yanked her sleeve down so fast, she nearly knocked over his water glass. Your eggs are getting cold. Wait. His hand came up, not touching her, just hovering in the space between them. Please, that's a unit tattoo. 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. The diner had gone quieter, not silent. The pipeline crew was still going. Hank Morrison was still cutting his eggs, but there was a shift in the ambient noise, people tuning in without seeming to. I don't know what you're talking about, Lena said. Iraq. His voice was urgent now, almost desperate. Were you in Iraq? She should walk away. Should shut this down like she'd shut down every other attempt at conversation that went deeper than breakfast orders and weather small talk. But something in his eyes stopped her. Not pity, not curiosity. Recognition. 2 tours, she heard herself say. Ramadi and Fallujah. But that was a long time ago. The man stood up so fast his stool scraped backward. What unit? What was your MOS? Combat medic. 2nd Platoon, Charlie Company, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. Jesus Christ. His voice cracked. What's your name? Your full name? Torres. Sergeant Lena Torres. The rank came out automatically. Muscle memory from a life she'd packed away in a box marked before. Who's asking? Gunnery Sergeant Mark O'Connell. His hand came up in an aborted movement, toward a salute, then dropped. You... He swallowed hard. You saved my life. The diner actually did go silent then. Lena stared at him, this stranger with desperate eyes, and a decade of dust in the lines of his face, and tried to place him. Tried to match the features to the chaos of those deployments. The endless patrols, the IED, strikes the screaming wounded in the back of MRAP's, blood on her hands, and sand in her teeth, and the weight of a rifle across her back while she worked. I don't remember, she said finally. I'm sorry I don't. March 15th, 2006. The words tumbled out of him now, fast and urgent. Route Michigan, just outside Ramadi. Our convoy got hit, 3 IEDs, coordinated attack. I was in the 2nd vehicle. Took shrapnel to the leg and chest. I was bleeding out in a drainage ditch. The kitchen had stopped moving. May stood frozen in the pass-through window. Even the pipeline crew had gone quiet. You came running through enemy fire, Mark continued. Rounds kicking up dirt all around you. You dragged me behind the vehicle, put pressure on the chest wound, wouldn't let me close my eyes. Kept talking to me. Told me about your sister's wedding, some story about her drunk bridesmaids, kept me conscious long enough for the casevac. The corpsman said another 3 minutes and I'd have been gone. Lena felt something crack open in her chest. Something she'd kept locked down for so long, she'd almost convinced herself it didn't exist anymore. She did remember. Not his face. There'd been too many faces, too much blood. But she remembered that day. Remembered the way the world had narrowed to the patch of ground behind that burning Humvee, to the pressure of her hands on his chest, to the desperate litany of stupid stories she'd told to keep him from slipping away. "You lived," she said. It wasn't a question. "I lived." His voice was thick. "Got sent to Landstuhl, then Walter Reed. They put me back together. I did 2 more deployments after that, made it home in one piece. Got married, had 2 daughters. All because you—" He stopped, visibly gathering himself. "All because you ran into hell to drag me out." "I was doing my job," Lena said quietly. "Hey, Sergeant Scarface." Chad Pike's voice cut across the diner like a blade. "You gonna stand there swapping war stories, or you gonna bring me more coffee? Some of us got actual work to do." The spell broke. Lena reached for the coffee pot, but Mark's hand closed gently around her wrist, not restraining, just stopping her. "Don't," he said. "It's fine. I'm used to it." "That's the problem." He released her wrist and turned toward the corner booth. "That's the goddamn problem." "Sir, please." May's voice came from behind the counter, worried. But Mark O'Connell was already moving, crossing the diner in 4 long strides, and when he reached the pipeline crew's table, he did something Lena had never seen any customer do in 3 years of working at the Red Star. He removed his cap, a gesture of respect so old-fashioned and so profound that it silenced the room like a gunshot. "You want to know who you're laughing at?" His voice was quiet, controlled, but it carried to every corner of the diner. "That woman's name is Sergeant Lena Torres. She's a decorated combat veteran who served 2 tours in Iraq with 3rd Battalion 5th Marines. She has a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star with Valor device. She saved 17 lives under fire, 17 Marines who went home to their families because she ran toward explosions instead of away from them." Chad's smirk had frozen on his face. "She got those scars," Mark continued, "pulling a wounded Marine from a burning vehicle after an IED strike. 3rd-degree burns over 40% of her body. She spent 8 months in the burn unit at Brooke Army Medical Center. Lost most of the function in her left hand. Had to learn to walk again." "Look, man, we didn't—" Brock started. "I'm not finished." Mark's voice could have cut glass. "That tattoo you've been laughing at, the one she keeps covered, it marks her as part of a brotherhood that most people can't begin to understand. And every day she comes in here and serves you coffee and takes your shit with a smile, because that's who she is. That's her character." He placed both palms on their table and leaned in. "So here's my question for you gentlemen. If she'd been in uniform, would you have said those things? If she'd walked in here wearing her medals, would you have made those jokes?" The silence was absolute. "That's what I thought." Mark straightened. "Respect isn't something you give only when someone's wearing the uniform. It's what you give because they're human. And if you need someone's resume before you can manage basic decency, then the problem isn't their scars, it's your character." He turned away from the table, and as he did, something extraordinary happened. Old Hank Morrison stood up, removed his postal service cap, pressed it to his chest. Then the Sandoval brothers. Then Mrs. Chen, rising from her corner table with tears streaming down her face. One by one, every veteran in the diner stood, and those who wore caps removed them, and they all turned to face Lena Torres, who stood behind the counter, with a coffee pot in her scarred hands, and something breaking open behind her eyes. A young kid couldn't have been more than 8, sitting with his mother in a booth by the window, slid out and walked over to Lena. He stared at her scars for a long moment, then looked up at her face. "Did it hurt?" he asked. Every adult in the diner seemed to hold their breath. Lena crouched down to his level, setting the coffee pot aside. When she spoke, her voice was gentle. "Yeah, honey, it hurt." "Does it still hurt?" "Sometimes, but not as much as being forgotten." The kid processed this, nodded solemnly, then did something unexpected. He stuck out his hand. "Thank you for your service," he said, clearly repeating something he'd been taught. Lena shook his small hand with her scarred one. "You're welcome." The mother mouthed, "Thank you," over her son's head, wiping at her eyes. Mark O'Connell had returned to his seat at the counter, but he was watching Lena with an expression that mixed relief and something like vindication. When she finally made it back to him, her hands were shaking. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. "Yeah, I did." He picked up his fork, then set it down again. "I've spent 19 years wondering what happened to the medic who saved me. Couldn't remember your name, couldn't find you through official channels. I was starting to think I'd imagined the whole thing." "You didn't imagine it?" "No." His eyes found hers. "I didn't. And when I saw that tattoo, heard those guys laughing." He shook his head. "I couldn't let it stand. Not when I owe you my life. Not when my daughters have a father because of you." From the corner booth, there was movement. Chad Pike stood up, his face red, his shoulders tight. For a moment, Lena thought he might start something, escalate this into the kind of confrontation that would require police involvement. Instead, he crossed the diner and stopped in front of her. He cleared his throat. "We're sorry. We didn't know." "Would it have mattered?" Lena asked. "If you'd known." The question hung in the air. Chad opened his mouth, closed it. Behind him, his crew was studying the table. "It should have mattered before we knew," Mark said from the counter. "That's the point." Chad nodded slowly, looked at Lena. "You're right. Yeah. You're right." He pulled out his wallet, dropped 3 20s on the counter. "For the food. And for..." He gestured vaguely at everything. "For being decent to us when we didn't deserve it." He walked out. His crew followed, subdued and silent. The door swung shut behind them, and the diner remained frozen for another heartbeat, before normal sound gradually filtered back in the clink of forks on plates, the gurgle of the coffee maker, low conversations resuming. May appeared at Lena's elbow. "You okay?" Lena realized she was crying, not sobbing, just tears streaming down her face while she stood there holding a coffee pot, like nothing had changed. "I don't know," she said honestly. May took the pot from her hands. "Go take your break. I've got the floor." "May, that's an order, Torres." The use of her last name, spoken with authority, triggered something automatic. Lena nodded and headed for the back door, needing air, needing space, needing to process whatever had just happened. The parking lot was empty, except for a few cars and the morning sun climbing higher, burning off the last of the night's chill. Lena leaned against the diner's brick wall, tilted her face up to the light, and let herself feel it, all the things she'd locked away in that box marked before. The pride of service, the weight of loss, the rage at being dismissed, the loneliness of carrying invisible wounds in a world that only recognized visible ones. "Sergeant Torres." She opened her eyes. Mark O'Connell stood a respectful distance away, hands in his pockets. "You followed me." "I wanted to apologize if I overstepped. That wasn't my intention." "You didn't overstep." She wiped at her face. You said things out loud that I've been thinking for 3 years. Why do you let them treat you like that?" It was a fair question, and it deserved a fair answer. "Because fighting back means becoming visible," she said. "And when you're visible, people ask questions. They want to know about your service, your injuries, your medals. They want to hear the stories. And She stopped, struggling to articulate something she'd never put into words. "I can't be that person anymore. The hero people expect. I'm just trying to survive being back." Mark nodded slowly. "I get that. But you know what? You don't have to be a hero. You just have to be yourself. And yourself is someone who ran into fire to save strangers. That doesn't go away just because you hung up the uniform. It feels like it did. That's because nobody's given you permission to believe it still matters. He pulled something from his pocket, a small laminated photo creased and faded. This is my squad, March 10th, 2006, 5 days before the attack. See that guy in the back row, fourth from the left. She looked. Young faces, desert camis, weapons and gear. The fourth guy from the left had Mark's eyes, but none of the lines, none of the weathering. That's you, she said. That's me. And every single person in this photo made it home from that deployment. Every single one. A couple got hit, a few got Purple Hearts, but they all lived. You know why. Why? Because of medics like you. He tucked the photo away. 17 lives, Sergeant Torres. That's just the official count, the ones where you were directly credited with the save. But how many others lived because you were there patching people up, keeping morale up, being the kind of steady presence that makes scared kids believe they're going to make it? Lena didn't have an answer. You're still serving, Mark said quietly. Every day you show up. Do your job with dignity. Refuse to let their cruelty break you that service. But maybe it's time to let people see it. I don't know how. Start small. Let the sleeve right up sometimes. Let the tattoo show. Let people ask questions. You'd be surprised how many folks are just waiting for permission to show respect. They just need to know it's earned. And yours is. The back door opened. May stuck her head out. Lena, table 4 needs... Oh, sorry. Didn't mean to interrupt. It's fine. Lena pushed off the wall. I'm coming. Mark turned to go, then paused. I'm in town for 3 days. VA appointment tomorrow, then heading back to North Carolina. Would you let me buy you dinner? Somewhere that isn't here? Just, I'd like to talk. If you're willing. Lena found herself nodding before she'd fully processed the question. Yeah, okay. 7 o'clock, I'm at the Comfort Inn on Route 20. I know where it is. Good. He smiled, tired but genuine. See you then, Sergeant. He walked to his truck, and Lena went back inside where the lunch prep was starting, and the normal rhythm of the day was reasserting itself. But something had shifted. The foundation had cracked, and through that crack light was starting to seep in. At table 4, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a sun hat was waiting with her husband. When Lena approached to take their order, the woman reached out and gently touched her hand. I just want to say thank you, she said, for your service, and I'm sorry for... She gestured at the empty corner booth. For that. My son's in Afghanistan right now, 3rd tour, and every day I pray someone like you is there if he needs help. What's his name? Lena asked. Jesse. Jesse Kaufman. He's with the 10th Mountain Division. I'll remember him, Lena said. And she meant it. The day continued. More customers, more orders, more coffee poured, and plates delivered. But now when people looked at her, some of them held her gaze. Some of them nodded. And when her sleeve rode up while she reached for a high shelf and the edge of that tattoo became visible, she didn't yank it down quite so fast. By the time her shift ended at 3, Lena was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical labor. The kind of tired that came from walls coming down, from defenses being breached, from being seen after years of careful invisibility. May caught her on the way out. You doing okay? Really? I think so. Ask me tomorrow. That Marine who spoke up, he's good people. Yeah, Lena agreed. He is. You going to see him again? Tonight. Dinner. May's eyebrows rose. Dinner? Don't start. I'm not starting anything. I'm just saying it's nice. You should have nice things. Lena didn't have a response to that, so she just squeezed May's shoulder and headed for her truck an old Ford that had seen better decades, but still ran. She drove home to her apartment, a one-bedroom on the second floor of a building that had been modern in the 80s and stood in the shower longer than necessary, letting the hot water ease muscles that held 3 years of tension. That night, she stood in front of her closet for 20 minutes, trying to decide what to wear to dinner with a man who'd called her Sergeant, like it was a title that still fit, who'd seen her scars and known immediately what they represented, who'd stood up in a room full of strangers and demanded they see what he saw. She chose jeans and a blue blouse, long sleeves but thin fabric, and stared at herself in the mirror. The scars were still there. They would always be there. But maybe they didn't have to be the whole story anymore. At 7 o'clock exactly, she pulled into the Comfort Inn parking lot and found Mark O'Connell waiting outside his room, wearing clean jeans and a button-down shirt, looking nervous. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he admitted. "I wasn't sure either," she said honestly. They drove to a steakhouse on the far side of town. Nothing fancy but clean and quiet. And for the first time in 3 years, Lena Torres sat across from someone who understood. Really understood who she'd been and what it had cost to become who she was now. And slowly, carefully, she began to let herself remember that the person she'd been and the person she was weren't as separate as she'd convinced herself they had to be. The scars were part of the story, but they weren't the ending. The steakhouse smelled like charcoal and rosemary, and the booth they settled into had high wooden backs that made the space feel private despite the Tuesday night crowd. Mark ordered coffee black, same as at the diner, and Lena found herself doing the same, even though she'd been pouring the stuff for 8 hours, and the last thing she needed was more caffeine. "So," Mark said after the waitress left, 19 years I've been looking for you, or trying to. You know how hard it is to track down someone when all you remember is their voice, and the fact that they wouldn't shut up about bridesmaids falling into a cake." Lena felt a smile tug at the corner of her mouth, the first genuine one in longer than she could remember. "My sister's wedding." "Yeah, that actually happened. 3 bridesmaids, all drunk, all trying to take a group photo too close to the dessert table. The whole thing collapsed. My mother cried for an hour." "You told me that story 4 times while you were working on my chest," Mark said. "Same story, different details each time. I figured you were just trying to keep me conscious." "I was. But it was also true. The 4th time you told it, you said one of the bridesmaids ended up marrying the guy who caught her when she fell." "She did. They've got 3 kids now." Mark laughed, and the sound was warm, unguarded. "See, that's the kind of detail that keeps a guy hanging on." I remember thinking, if I can just stay awake long enough to hear how this story ends, I'll be okay. Did it work? I'm here, aren't I? The waitress returned with their coffee and took their orders: ribeye for Mark, grilled chicken for Lena. And when they were alone again, the silence that settled between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that came from shared experience, from understanding that some things didn't need to be said out loud to be acknowledged. "Can I ask you something?" Lena said, finally wrapping both hands around her mug, the way Mark had that morning. "Why did you do it? Stand up like that, I mean. You could have just told me privately. You didn't have to make a scene." Mark took a long sip of his coffee, considering. "You remember Staff Sergeant McKinnon, big guy from Alabama, had a scar across his face from a training accident?" "Yeah. He was with us in Fallujah. After he got back stateside, he stopped at a gas station in Georgia, still in uniform. 2 guys started giving him shit about his scar, saying he looked like a thug, asking if he'd been in a knife fight. He just took it, didn't say anything, got his gas and left. That sounds like Mac. He never wanted confrontation. I ran into him 6 months later at a reunion. He'd stopped wearing the uniform off base, said it wasn't worth the hassle, the stares, the comments. A decorated combat veteran afraid to wear his own uniform because people made him feel like a freak. Mark's jaw tightened. That's not right. That's not how it's supposed to work. It's how it does work, though. Only because nobody pushes back. Only because the rest of us sit there and let it happen. He met her eyes. I sat in that diner for 20 minutes listening to those guys tear into you. 20 minutes where I did nothing because I was tired and it wasn't my problem and I just wanted to eat my breakfast in peace. And then I saw that tattoo and I realized, Jesus, I realized that could have been me. If things had gone differently, if you hadn't been there, my daughters would have grown up without a father. My wife would have been a widow at 25. All the moments I've had since that day in Ramadi, they're borrowed time. Time you gave me. His voice had gone rough, and he cleared his throat hard. So, when I saw those guys laughing at you, treating you like you were nothing, I couldn't sit there anymore. I owed you more than silence. Lena felt something break loose in her chest, some calcified piece of grief she hadn't known she was carrying. I don't remember most of the people I treated. There were so many. So much blood. Sometimes I dream about hands reaching for me, faces I can't quite see, voices begging me not to let them die. And I wake up not knowing if they made it or not. How many didn't make it? Out of the ones I treated directly, 4 out of 78 patients over 2 deployments. The numbers came automatically carved into her memory, like the tattoo on her arm. Everyone else lived long enough to get to surgical. What happened after that? She shrugged. I don't know. I never followed up. Why not? Because I couldn't afford to care that much. If I let myself think about them as people, as husbands and sons and fathers, I'd freeze up. I had to see them as problems to solve, injuries to treat. Keep them alive long enough to get to the next level of care. That was the job. But you told me about your sister's wedding. You made me think about something other than dying. That was different. You were... She stopped, struggling to articulate something she'd never examined too closely. You were conscious, looking at me. And I knew if I didn't keep you talking, you'd slip away. So I gave you something to hold on to. You gave me your humanity, Mark said quietly. In the middle of hell, you reminded me there was still a world worth fighting for. Weddings and cake and drunk bridesmaids, normal life. That's what kept me hanging on. Their food arrived, and they ate in silence for a while, both of them processing. The steak was good, cooked right, but Lena barely tasted it. Her mind was back in that drainage ditch, sand and blood, and the weight of another person's life, literally in her hands. Can I ask you something now? Mark said, cutting into his ribeye. What happened after you got hit? Lena set down her fork. She'd known this question was coming, had been expecting it since that morning, but that didn't make it easier to answer. November 2007, Fallujah. We were providing security for a civil affairs team doing reconstruction assessment. IED hit the lead vehicle, big one buried deep. The Humvee went up like a firework. I was in the trail vehicle. Should have stayed put. Should have waited for EOD to clear the area. But I could hear someone screaming and I ran. You ran toward the explosion. That was the job. That's what medics do. She picked up her coffee more for something to do with her hands than because she wanted it. The corporal in the driver's seat was already gone. The gunner was blown clear, compound fractures, but alive. But the TC, the truck commander, he was trapped. Dashboard collapsed on his legs. Fuel line ruptured, fire starting to spread from the engine block. Mark had stopped eating his full attention on her. I got him out. Don't remember exactly how adrenaline does funny things to memory, but I got him clear of the vehicle, started dragging him back to cover, and that's when the fuel tank went. Fireball caught both of us. His body shielded most of me, but my left side, she gestured at the scars. 42% burns, 3rd and 4th degree. Jesus! They medevaced us both to Germany. He died 3 days later, Sepsis. I woke up 2 weeks after that in the burn unit at Brook, and the first thing they told me was that he didn't make it. All that pain, all that damage, and I couldn't even save him. But you tried. That counts. Does it? The question came out sharper than she intended. I'm not sure his wife thinks so. I'm not sure his kids think so. Did you ever talk to them? Once. At the funeral. She thanked me for trying. She was very gracious about it. Lena's laugh was bitter. Gracious. Like I'd done her some kind of favor. You did. You gave her husband a chance. That's all any of us can ask for. It wasn't enough. It never is, Mark said gently. That's the burden we carry. But you can't let one loss erase 17 saves, Lena. You can't let the ones you couldn't save define you more than the ones you could. Easy to say. Not easy at all. I've spent 19 years dealing with survivor's guilt, wondering why I made it when other guys didn't. Why I got to go home when Jenkins and Ramirez and Kowalski came back in flag-draped boxes. There's no good answer. There's just you keep living. You honor them by making your life matter. Lena pushed food around her plate, not trusting herself to speak. How long were you in the hospital? Mark asked. 8 months at Brook. 6 surgeries, skin grafts, physical therapy. They discharged me with a medical retirement in June 2008. 40% disability rating upgraded to 60% on appeal. And just like that, I wasn't a Marine anymore. That's when you came here? Not right away. I spent a year in San Antonio going to follow-up appointments trying to figure out who I was if I wasn't Sergeant Torres. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I had some dark months. Wouldn't recommend them. Mark nodded understanding in his eyes. They both knew what dark months meant in veteran speak. The times when the weight got too heavy, when the memories got too loud, when the gap between who you were and who you'd become felt too wide to bridge. What brought you here? He asked. To West Texas. My aunt died and left me a little money. Not much, but enough to buy a used truck and put first and last month's rent on an apartment. I saw a help wanted sign at the diner, and May hired me on the spot. No questions about the scars, no pity, just, can you start tomorrow? It was the first time since I got out that someone treated me like a person instead of a problem. May seems like good people. She is. She doesn't ask about my past, doesn't push, just lets me work. And for 3 years, that's been enough. Has it? The question landed like a stone. Lena looked up, meeting Mark's steady gaze. I don't know anymore, she admitted. This morning I would have said yes, that I was fine, that I'd found my equilibrium, that I didn't need anything more than a quiet job and a small life. But then you stood up and said all those things, and suddenly I couldn't remember why I'd convinced myself that being invisible was the same as being safe. It's not the same. I'm starting to see that. The waitress came by to refill their coffee and offer dessert. They both declined, but neither moved to leave. The restaurant had emptied out some of the dinner rush, giving way to the quieter late evening crowd, and their booth felt like a small island of stillness in the larger world. Tell me about your daughters, Lena said, needing to shift the conversation away from her own wounds. You said you had 2. Mark's face transformed, the tension easing into something softer. Emily and Sarah, 16 and 13. Emily's the serious one. Straight A's debate team, wants to be a lawyer. Sarah's the wild card, plays soccer. Dyes her hair a different color every month. Gives me heart attacks on a regular basis. Do they know about Ramadi? They know I served. They know I got hurt. They don't know the details. He pulled out his phone, scrolled to a photo. My wife says I should tell them that they're old enough. But I don't want them to see me that way, as someone who was that close to not coming home. The photo showed 2 girls flanking Mark, all 3 of them smiling in front of a Christmas tree. The older one had Mark's eyes. The younger one, his stubborn jaw. They looked happy, secure, loved. "They look like you," Lena said. "They act like their mother, thank God. Michelle's the reason I'm still sane." She put up with the nightmares, the flashbacks, the times I'd wake up at 3 a.m., convinced I was still in country. She never gave up on me, even when I'd given up on myself. She sounds remarkable. She is. He tucked the phone away. "She's also the one who told me to take this trip. I've been looking for you for years, checking unit rosters, reaching out to other guys from the battalion, posting in veteran forums. Never found anything. And then last month, I was at a VA appointment in North Carolina, and I met this guy who'd served with 3rd 5 a few years after me. We got to talking, and I mentioned looking for a female medic who'd saved my life in Ramadi. He said he remembered hearing about a Sergeant Torres who'd gotten burned up in Fallujah, that she'd moved somewhere out west after her discharge. Small world. Smaller than you think. I spent 2 weeks calling every diner, every restaurant, every business I could find in West Texas, asking if they had a Lena Torres working there. May answered on the 47th call. Lena stared at him. "You called 47 places." 48 technically, but who's counting? His smile was crooked. "Michelle said I was obsessed. She was probably right, but I needed to find you. Needed to say thank you. And then I walked into the diner this morning and saw those guys treating you like garbage, and I realized I didn't just need to thank you, I needed to make sure the world knew what you'd done. Mark, I'm not some hero. I was just a medic doing her job." That's what every real hero says. He leaned forward, his voice intense. "You know what's messed up? The fact that you have to hide who you are. That you cover your tattoo and take abuse from guys who wouldn't last 10 minutes in the situations you walked into every day. That's what's messed up. Not your scars, not your service. The fact that we live in a world where people like you feel like you have to be invisible to be safe. Changing that seems like a pretty tall order. So was getting me out of that ditch. You did it anyway." Lena felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back hard. "I don't know if I have the energy for that fight." "You don't have to fight alone. That's the thing nobody tells you when you get out. You're not on your own anymore. There's a whole community of people who understand, who've been where you are, who'll stand with you. You just have to let them see you. And if I do, if I stop hiding, what then? Then maybe the world becomes a little less hostile for the next veteran who walks into that diner with scars they can't hide. Maybe someone else gets to feel a little less alone." The check came, and Mark grabbed it before Lena could reach for her wallet. They argued briefly, but he was immovable. "I owe you my life," he said firmly. "The least I can do is buy you dinner." They walked out into the cool night air, the parking lot mostly empty now, and stood by Lena's truck in that awkward space between goodbye and whatever came next. "I'm at the VA hospital in Amarillo tomorrow," Mark said. "Routine follow-up, nothing serious. But I was thinking, would you want to come with me? There's a veteran services coordinator there. I know a woman named Patricia Chen. She runs a peer support program. I think you two should meet." "Mark, I don't need." "Not for you. Well, maybe for you, but also for other people who might need what you have to offer. Your experience, your perspective. There's a whole generation of veterans coming home now dealing with the same stuff we dealt with, feeling just as lost. You could help them." Lena opened her mouth to refuse to retreat back into the safety of invisibility, but something stopped her. Maybe it was the way Mark looked at her, not with pity, but with respect. Maybe it was the memory of that kid in the diner, asking if it hurt, looking at her like she was someone worth learning from, instead of someone to avoid. Maybe it was just exhaustion with her own isolation. "What time?" she heard herself ask. 10 a.m. I can pick you up." "I'll drive myself. Text me the address." They exchanged numbers, and as Lena climbed into her truck, Mark tapped on the window. She rolled it down. "Thank you," he said. "For tonight, for Ramadi, for everything. You already thanked me. I'll probably thank you another 100 times before I leave town. Get used to it." She drove home through empty streets, the radio off her mind, too full for music. The apartment felt different when she walked in, smaller maybe, or stuffed with the weight of 3 years of self-imposed exile. The walls were bare except for a calendar from the hardware store. No photos, no memorabilia, nothing that marked this space as belonging to anyone in particular. She'd thought that was safety. Now, it just looked like erasure. In the bedroom closet, pushed to the back behind winter coats, she rarely needed in West Texas, was a cardboard box with USMC stamped on the side. She'd packed it the day she left Brook Medical Center and hadn't opened it since. Her hands hesitated on the tape before pulling it free. Inside her dress, blues cleaned and pressed and wrapped in plastic. Her ribbons and medals in their cases. The challenge coins she'd collected from officers and NCOs. A photo of her platoon, everyone young and fierce, and convinced they were invincible. And at the bottom, folded carefully, the flag from her retirement ceremony. Lena lifted the photo out, studying faces she hadn't let herself remember. There was Mac with his pre-scar smile. Corporal Jensen, who'd gone on to become a cop in Ohio. Gunny Havers, who'd written her a recommendation letter that she'd never used. And there, third, from the left in the back row, was her 26 years old, no scars, no idea what was coming. She looked happy, confident, like she knew exactly who she was and where she belonged. Lena set the photo on her dresser, propped against the lamp, where she'd see it every morning. Then she pulled out her phone and sent a text to Mark. "I'll be there tomorrow. Thank you for finding me." His response came almost immediately. "Thank you for letting yourself be found." She fell asleep that night with the closet door open and the box unpacked and the photo watching over her. And for the first time in 3 years, she didn't dream about the fire. The next morning, she called May before her shift. "I need the day off," Lena said. "I know it's last minute, but—" "Take it," May interrupted. "Take 2 if you need them. You've got 3 years of unused sick days anyway." "May, Lena honey, whatever you're doing with that Marine who came in yesterday, do it. You've been sleepwalking through this job since you started. If he's waking you up, don't fight it." So Lena drove to Amarillo, 2 hours north, on roads so straight they looked like they'd been drawn with a ruler, and met Mark in the parking lot of the VA hospital at 9:45. He looked rested, more settled than he had the day before, and when he smiled at her, it felt like sunlight. "Ready?" he asked. "Not even a little bit." "Perfect. That's how I felt walking into combat. Let's go anyway." They found Patricia Chen in an office that smelled like coffee and determination. A woman in her 50s with salt and pepper hair and eyes that had seen enough bullshit to recognize it from a mile away. "Mark's told me about you," she said, shaking Lena's scarred hand without hesitation. "Combat medic, 2 tours, Bronze Star. Impressive." "Ancient history," Lena said. "Nothing about service is ancient history. It's always present tense for those who've lived it." Patricia gestured to chairs. "Sit. Talk to me about what you're doing now." And somehow in that small office, with its government-issue furniture and motivational posters about resilience, Lena found herself talking about the diner, about the silence of civilians who watched cruelty and did nothing, about feeling like she'd left herself behind in Iraq and spent 3 years trying to figure out how to function as whoever was left. Patricia listened without interrupting, without offering platitudes, and when Lena finally wound down, she leaned back and said, "You're angry." "I'm not." "You are, and you should be. You gave everything, and when you came home, the world treated you like you were broken, like your scars were something shameful instead of evidence of your courage. That's not right, and you know it's not right, and you're furious about it, even though you've been telling yourself you're fine. Lena felt something crack open. What am I supposed to do with that anger? Use it, Patricia said simply. Channel it. Turn it into something that helps other people who feel exactly like you do. We run a peer mentorship program here, veterans helping veterans navigate reintegration. We need people like you. People who've been through hell and came out the other side. I'm not out the other side. I'm barely hanging on. Which means you remember what the struggle feels like. That's the most valuable thing you can offer. Not solutions, but solidarity. The knowledge that someone else has walked this path and survived. Mark had been quiet, but now he spoke up. What if she doesn't want to do formal mentorship? What if she just wants to, I don't know, exist without feeling like she has to justify her scars every day? Then we start there, Patricia said. But I'll tell you what I've learned in 20 years of doing this work. Isolation kills more veterans than combat ever did. Connection heals. Community heals. And sometimes the best way to heal yourself is to help someone else heal. They talked for another hour, and by the time they left, Lena had Patricia's card and a stack of pamphlets about veteran services and an invitation to a peer support group that met every Thursday night at the VFW Hall in Midland. You don't have to go, Mark said as they walked to their vehicles. No pressure. But if you do, I think you'd be surprised how many people are waiting for someone like you to show up. Someone like me. Someone real, he said. Someone who isn't pretending it's all okay. Someone who survived and is still figuring out what that means. Lena clutched the pamphlets, feeling their weight like a promise or a threat. You're leaving tomorrow. Yeah, got to get back to Michelle and the girls, but I'll stay in touch. You're not getting rid of me now that I've found you. Good, she said, and meant it. They stood in the parking lot, two veterans who'd collided after 19 years and changed each other in ways neither fully understood yet. Thank you, Lena said finally, for seeing me, for making me visible when I'd worked so hard to disappear. Thank you for saving my life, so I could be here to do it. Mark pulled her into a hug, careful, respectful, but genuine. You're not invisible anymore, Lena Torres. Time to figure out what that means. She drove back to the diner in the afternoon light, and when she walked through the door, May looked up from the register with knowing eyes. Good day. Different day, Lena said. Different good or different bad? Just different. We'll see. She tied on her apron and went back to work, but something had shifted. When her sleeve rode up and the tattoo showed, she didn't pull it down. When a customer stared at her scars, she met their gaze steadily until they looked away. And when Chad Pike's crew came in for dinner, subdued and quiet, Chad himself approached the counter. We wanted to apologize again, he said. Properly. What we said yesterday, there's no excuse. We were assholes, and you didn't deserve it. No, Lena agreed. I didn't. Is there anything we can do to make it right? She thought about Patricia's words about connection and community and using anger for something constructive. Yeah, she said slowly. Actually, there is. Chad Pike shifted his weight from one boot to the other, clearly expecting Lena to tell him to leave to take his crew and never come back. The restaurant had gone quiet again, the way it did whenever tension rippled through the space. May stood at the register with her hand hovering near the phone, ready to call someone if this went sideways. But Lena was thinking about Patricia Chen's words, about turning anger into something useful, about connection being the antidote to isolation. She was thinking about all the veterans who walked through the world carrying invisible wounds, and all the civilians who had no idea how to bridge that gap. You want to make it right, she said, meeting Chad's eyes. Then help me do something. Okay, yeah, what do you need? The VA hospital in Amarillo runs programs for veterans, support groups, job placement, mental health services. They're always underfunded, always need donations. She pulled Patricia's card from her pocket. You and your crew organize a fundraiser. Get your company involved. Pipeline workers make decent money, and there's enough of you to make a real difference. Chad blinked, clearly not expecting this. A fundraiser for the VA? Unless you'd rather just apologize and forget about it. That works too. She started to turn away, but he stopped her. No, we'll do it. I'll talk to the guys, talk to the company. We'll make it happen. He pulled out his phone. Give me that number. I'll call them tomorrow. Lena handed him the card, and Chad photographed it before handing it back. Anything else? Yeah. Stop being assholes to people you don't know. You want to crack jokes, crack them about each other. Leave the customers alone. Fair enough. He extended his hand. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Really sorry. She shook his hand, feeling the calluses that came from manual labor, the strength in his grip that he was being careful not to use. Apology accepted. Now go sit down and let me do my job. The crew ate their dinner in relative silence, left a generous tip, and filed out with backward glances that held something between shame and respect. May came over as Lena was clearing their table. You could have told them to go to hell, May said. I thought about it, but what would that change? They'd just be assholes somewhere else to someone else. This way, maybe they learn something. When did you get so wise? About 24 hours ago. Lena carried the dishes to the kitchen. I'm still figuring out what to do with it. The rest of the shift passed in the familiar rhythm of orders and coffee refills and small talk with regulars who were starting to look at her differently. Word had spread small town faster than wildfire about what had happened the day before. About the Marine who'd stood up and called her a hero. About the decorated combat veteran who'd been serving them eggs and coffee for 3 years, while they'd barely noticed she existed. Mrs. Chen stayed until closing, nursing her coffee long after she'd normally leave. When Lena came to refill it for the 5th time, the older woman caught her wrist gently. My husband served in Korea, she said in accented English. He had nightmares until the day he died. Couldn't talk about what he saw. I tried to help, but I didn't know how. Her eyes were wet. If there had been programs, then people who understood, maybe he wouldn't have suffered so much. I'm sorry, Lena said softly. Don't be sorry. Be visible. Let people know veterans need help. That's the best thing you can do for him now. She pressed a folded bill into Lena's hand. For the fundraiser. When they do it. It was $100. Lena tried to give it back, but Mrs. Chen closed her fingers around it. Let me help, the older woman said. Please. So Lena took it, and when she got home that night, she put it in an envelope and wrote, for Patricia, on the front, and felt like maybe something was starting to shift. The next morning, Mark stopped by the diner before heading back to North Carolina. He ordered coffee and eggs, same as before, but this time when Lena served him, she rolled up her sleeves deliberately, letting the scars and tattoos show in the morning light, streaming through the windows. Look at you, he said, smiling. Not hiding anymore. Baby steps. Don't get too excited. I'm excited anyway. You're going to that support group Thursday. I don't know yet. You should. Even if you just sit in the back and listen. Even if you don't say a word. Just be there. Let people see you. You're very pushy for someone who's about to drive 15 hours. It's a 20-hour drive, actually. I'm breaking it into 2 days. He pulled out his wallet to pay, but Lena waved him off. On the house, May's orders. Tell May she's good people. I'll tell her you said so. They stood there for a moment, and Lena realized she was going to miss him. This man who'd been a voice in her memory for 19 years had become solid and real over the course of 2 days, and now he was leaving. Stay in touch, she asked. You couldn't stop me if you tried. I'll text you when I get home. And when you go to that support group, you text me and tell me how it went. Deal. Mark picked up his bag, then paused. You know what the weirdest part of all this is? I spent 19 years thinking I needed to find you to say thank you, to close that loop. But now I think maybe I needed to find you for you. So you'd remember who you are, what you're capable of. Pretty arrogant thinking you could remind me of anything. Is it working? Lena smiled, genuine, reaching her eyes. Yeah, it's working. He left, and she watched his truck pull onto Highway 87, heading east, and something in her chest felt both lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because she wasn't carrying the weight of invisibility anymore. Heavier because visibility came with responsibility, with the expectation that she'd do something with it. Thursday came faster than she expected. Lena stood in her apartment at 6:30 in the evening, staring at the address for the VFW hall in Midland, trying to talk herself out of going. It would be easier to stay home, safer. She could text Mark some excuse, tell Patricia she wasn't ready, go back to the comfortable numbness she'd cultivated for 3 years. But then, she thought about Mrs. Chen's husband suffering in silence, about the kid in the diner asking if it hurt, looking for an honest answer, about Chad Pike and his crew who'd needed someone to hold up a mirror and show them what their cruelty looked like. She got in her truck. The VFW hall was a low-slung building with a gravel parking lot and an American flag that needed replacing. A dozen vehicles were parked outside, and Lena sat in her truck for 10 minutes before forcing herself to walk to the door. Inside, the space smelled like old carpet and coffee. A circle of mismatched chairs had been set up in the main room, and about 15 people milled around a table laden with grocery store cookies and a massive coffee urn. They ranged in age from early 20s to late 70s. Men and women, different branches, different eras. But they all had the same look in their eyes, the one that came from seeing things that couldn't be unseen. A man in his 60s, with a Vietnam veteran cap, approached her. First time, yeah. I'm Bobby. I run this circus. Well, I try to. Mostly I just make coffee and keep people from talking over each other. He had kind eyes and a firm handshake. You don't have to talk if you don't want to. Some folks just listen for months before they're ready. That's fine too. I'm not sure what I'm doing here, Lena admitted. None of us are. That's kind of the point. He gestured to the circle. Grab some coffee and find a seat. We start at 7. Lena poured herself a cup, terrible coffee, burnt and weak, and chose a chair near the back of the circle. People filtered in, nodding at her, not pushing conversation. A woman about her age with a prosthetic leg sat down next to her. Army or Marines? The woman asked. Marines. You. Army. Lost this in Kandahar, 2011. IED. She tapped her prosthetic casually. You don't have visible hardware, but you've got the look. What look? The one that says you've seen some shit and can't quite figure out how to live with it. The woman extended her hand. I'm Alex. Lena. Nice to meet you, Lena. Fair warning, some of these sessions get heavy. If you need to step out, no one judges. We've all been there. At 7 sharp, Bobby called the group to order. They started with introductions. First names and branch of service. Only. No ranks, no details, unless someone chose to share them. When it came to Lena, she said, Lena, Marines, Iraq. And that was enough. Then Bobby opened the floor. Anyone got something they need to talk about? A young guy, couldn't have been more than 25, raised his hand. I yelled at my girlfriend last night. Stupid shit, she was just asking what I wanted for dinner, but I went off on her. I don't know why I do that. Why I can't just be normal. Because normal got beaten out of us, an older woman said gently. Takes time to find a new normal. What did you do after you yelled? Apologized, tried to explain. She says she understands, but... He shook his head. I don't want her to have to understand. I want to be better. You working with the VA? Getting treatment? Bobby asked. Yeah. Therapy twice a month. They've got me on meds for the anxiety. That's good. That's the work. It doesn't happen overnight, but it happens. Bobby looked around the circle. Anyone else have issues with anger management strategies that work? The conversation flowed, people sharing techniques, breathing exercises, walking away before engaging, having a code word with partners that meant, I need space right now. It was practical, grounded, honest, in a way that civilian advice never was. These people understood the specific flavor of veteran anger, the way it came from hypervigilance and loss of control, and the brain's inability to distinguish between active threat and everyday stress. Lena listened, absorbing, and realized that for the first time in 3 years, she was in a room where she didn't have to explain herself, where the scars, visible and invisible, were just part of the landscape everyone navigated. What about you, Lena? Bobby said during a lull. Anything you want to share? She almost said no, almost retreated behind the safety of silence. But then she thought about Mark's words. You're not invisible anymore, and something in her decided to risk it. I've been working at a diner for 3 years, she said, taking shit from customers who think my scars are funny, letting them treat me like I'm nothing. And until this week, I thought that was just how it had to be, that I didn't have a right to expect better. What changed? Alex asked. Someone recognized my unit tattoo, called me out in front of everyone, made them see who I was before. She gestured at her scars. Before this, and suddenly people were treating me with respect. But the thing that pisses me off is, why did they need to know? Why does respect require proof of service? The room was silent, everyone processing. Because civilians don't understand, Bobby said finally. They don't know what it costs. So they need the uniform, or the medals, or the story to make it real. It's not right, but it's how it is. So what do we do about it? Lena asked. Just accept that we're only worth respect if we can prove we earned it. We educate, the older woman said. We make ourselves visible. We tell our stories when we're ready. And we teach people that dignity isn't something you have to earn, it's something every human deserves, service or not. That's a big ask, someone muttered. Yeah, well, so was what they asked of us when they sent us to war, Alex shot back. We did that. We can do this too. The meeting ran another hour, and by the time it ended, Lena felt wrung out, but strangely settled. She'd found her people. Not all of them, not permanently, but enough to know she wasn't as alone as she'd believed. Alex caught her on the way out. You coming back next week? Maybe. Good. We need more women in this group. It's a sausage fest most nights. She pulled out her phone. Give me your number. We've got a women veterans group that meets monthly. You should come to that too. They exchanged numbers, and as Lena drove home, she realized she'd just done something she hadn't done in 3 years. Made plans with another veteran. Built a connection that might turn into friendship. Let someone see her struggle without shame. She texted Mark. Went to the group. Didn't completely hate it. Might go back. His response came immediately. Proud of you. This is just the beginning. Over the next 2 weeks, things shifted in incremental ways. Chad Pike called Patricia Chen and organized a fundraiser. His company matched employee donations dollar for dollar, and between the pipeline crew, the diner regulars who'd heard about the cause, and Mrs. Chen's network in the Asian American community, they raised $15,000. May printed up a flyer about the fundraiser and posted it at the diner. Beneath it, she added a new sign: "We support our veterans. Zero tolerance for disrespect based on disability, appearance, or service-related injuries. Management reserves the right to refuse service." When Lena asked about it, May just shrugged. "Should have done it years ago. I let you take abuse because you said you were fine with it, but you weren't fine, and I should have protected you anyway." May. No arguments. It's done. The young soldier who'd saluted Lena that first day came back this time with 3 friends from his unit. They ate lunch and left their unit patches on the table with a note, "For the wall, if you want to start one." May did want to start one. She cleared a section of wall near the entrance and began mounting patches, photos, and challenge coins that veterans donated. Within a month, the Wall of Honor filled up and expanded to a second panel. People started coming to the diner specifically to see it, to add their own memorabilia to stand in front of it and remember. The media picked up on it first, the local paper, then a regional news station, then a freelancer who sold the story to a national outlet. Small town diner becomes veteran sanctuary, ran with photos of Lena serving coffee, her scars visible, her unit tattoo clear in the frame. The attention was uncomfortable. Reporters called asking for interviews. Strangers messaged her on social media, thanking her for her service. A producer from a morning talk show wanted to fly her to New York. She declined all of it. Why? May asked, genuinely curious. You could reach so many people. Tell your story on a bigger stage. Because it's not about me, Lena said. It's about creating a space where veterans feel safe, where they don't have to perform their trauma for validation. The minute I go on TV and make this about my story, it stops being about community and starts being about spectacle. You're probably right, but you're also allowed to take credit for what you've built here. I didn't build it alone. That was true. The Wall of Honor became a gathering place. Veterans started meeting at the diner on Sunday mornings, an unofficial breakfast club, where they could talk freely about service and struggle, and the weird, liminal space of civilian life. Bobby from the VFW brought his whole support group one week. Alex organized a job fair, connecting veterans with local employers who'd committed to interview at least one veteran candidate for every open position. The pipeline company implemented mandatory respect training for all employees, using the diner incident as a case study. Chad Pike, to his credit, participated in the training and told his story honestly, how easy it had been to dehumanize someone based on appearance, how much harder it was to maintain that cruelty once he understood who she was. I can't take back what I said, he told a room full of his coworkers. But I can make sure I never say anything like it again. And I can call it out when I see other people doing it. That's the work. Lena heard about the training secondhand and felt something unlock in her chest. Not forgiveness exactly. Forgiveness was still complicated, but acknowledgement that people could change if given the framework and the motivation. In late October, Patricia Chen drove down from Amarillo with a proposal. The VA wanted to pilot a peer mentorship program in West Texas, and they wanted Lena to help design it. You've built something here, Patricia said over coffee at the diner. A model for how veterans can support each other and how communities can support veterans. We want to replicate it in other towns, other counties. But we need someone who understands both sides, the veteran experience and the civilian world. I'm not qualified for that, Lena protested. You're the most qualified person I know. You've lived it, you've survived it, and you've turned your pain into something constructive. Patricia slid a folder across the table. It's part-time to start, 15 hours a week, flexible schedule. You'd coordinate peer mentors, develop training materials, work with local VAs to identify veterans who need support, and you'd keep working here if you want to. This isn't meant to replace your life, it's meant to expand it. Lena opened the folder, scanning the job description. The salary wasn't much, But combined with her disability pay and the diner income, it would be enough to live on comfortably. More importantly, it would give her purpose beyond pouring coffee and absorbing other people's stories. Can I think about it? Take your time. But know this, the VA doesn't usually create positions around specific people. They're doing it for you because they believe in what you can build. That night, Lena called Mark. He answered on the second ring, and she could hear his daughters arguing in the background. "Hang on," he said. "Girls, take it outside or take it to your rooms. I don't care which, but I can't hear." The noise faded. "Sorry. Ongoing dispute about who gets to use the car tomorrow night." "Sounds intense. You have no idea. What's up? You okay?" She told him about Patricia's offer, about the opportunity, and the fear that she wasn't ready, that she'd fail everyone who believed in her. "You're not going to fail," Mark said when she finished. "Want to know how I know?" "How?" "Because you already did the hardest part. You made yourself visible. Everything else is just details." That's a pretty casual assessment of a job that involves counseling traumatized veterans. You're right. Let me rephrase. You've spent 3 years in survival mode. This job is asking you to shift into purpose mode. That's scary as hell, because purpose requires vulnerability and hope and the belief that things can get better. But you've already started doing that work. At the support group. With the Wall of Honor. With Chad Pike and his crew. This is just the next step. What if I'm not good at it? Then you'll learn. Same way you learned everything else. And you'll have support, Patricia the VA, your peer group me. You're not doing this alone, Lena. She sat with that feeling the truth of it settle. When did you get so wise? Around the time a medic saved my life and taught me that asking for help isn't weakness, it's strategy. She could hear the smile in his voice. Take the job. Change some lives. Let yourself be changed in the process. You make it sound easy. Nothing about this is easy, but it's worth it. Trust me. She took the job, started training in November, shadowing Patricia and learning the administrative side of peer support, how to match mentors with mentees, how to navigate VA bureaucracy, how to recognize when someone needed more help than peers could provide, and facilitate appropriate referrals. The work was hard, requiring her to engage with other people's trauma while managing her own. But it was also clarifying. Every veteran she helped connect to resources. Every mentor she trained. Every small victory in someone's recovery. It all felt like reclaiming something she'd lost when she left the Marines. The sense that what she did mattered. That her skills and experience had value beyond survival. She cut back her hours at the diner to 3 shifts a week, and May promoted a young woman named Sarah, Army veteran, discharged 6 months ago, struggling to find her footing to full-time. The two of them worked together on Saturdays, trading stories during slow periods, building the kind of easy camaraderie that came from shared understanding. The Thursday night support group became a fixture in Lena's week. She went from silent observer to occasional participant to someone people sought out for advice. Not because she had all the answers, but because she'd walked the path they were walking and made it through. In December, Alex invited her to a women veterans retreat, a weekend in the Hill Country. 30 women from different branches and eras focused on healing and connection. Lena almost said no. Weekends away felt indulgent, frivolous, not something she deserved. But she went anyway, and it changed her. 30 women, all carrying their own scars, visible and invisible, gathered in a rustic lodge and spent 3 days being honest about the cost of service. They talked about military sexual trauma and combat injuries and the specific ways the world dismissed or fetishized women veterans. They did yoga and art therapy and sat around a bonfire telling stories that made them laugh and cry and rage. On the last night, a woman named Teresa, Air Force Desert Storm, still dealing with Gulf War syndrome, stood by the fire and said, "I spent 20 years thinking I was broken. that what happened over there made me less than who I was before. But this weekend being with all of you, I realize I'm not broken. I'm just changed. And change isn't the same as damage. The words landed in Lena's chest like a stone breaking water. Changed, not damaged. Transformed, not ruined. The scars weren't evidence of destruction. They were proof of survival, of adaptation of a body and mind that had endured and evolved. She went home from that retreat and took down the curtains in her apartment that had kept the space dark and cave-like. She hung the photo from her deployment on the living room wall. She framed her Bronze Star citation and put it next to her bed, not as a monument to the past, but as a reminder that courage lived in her still. And when Mark texted asking how she was doing, she sent him a photo of her apartment with the message, "Learning to live in the light." His response, "About damn time." By the end of the year, the peer mentorship program had connected 47 veterans with trained mentors. 8 of them had found stable employment. 12 had enrolled in college. 3 had reconnected with estranged family members. And every single one of them knew that someone out there understood that they weren't navigating this alone. Chad Pike's crew came to the diner for Christmas Eve dinner, and Chad approached Lena with an envelope. "What's this?" she asked. "The company's doing a veteran hiring initiative. We've got 3 positions opening in January: equipment maintenance safety coordinator and field supervisor. All of them pay above market rate, and they're actively seeking veteran candidates. Thought you might know some people." "I know a lot of people." "Good. Get them to apply. We're serious about this." She took the envelope, and later that night, sitting in her apartment with Christmas lights, casting soft shadows, she sent out a group text to her network, "Job opportunities available. Good pay, veteran-friendly employer. Let me know if you're interested." 5 people responded within the hour. The world hadn't become perfect. Veterans still struggled, still fell through cracks in the system, still faced discrimination and indifference. But in this small corner of West Texas, something had shifted. A community had formed, built on mutual support and the radical notion that dignity shouldn't require proof of service, but that service should be honored when it was revealed. And at the center of it all was a former combat medic with burn scars and a unit tattoo who'd learned that visibility wasn't weakness. It was the first step toward building something that mattered. The January morning came cold and bright, the kind of West Texas winter day where the sun made promises the wind refused to keep. Lena stood in the parking lot of the diner at 6 a.m., her breath visible in the frozen air, watching the sunrise paint the highway gold. 6 months had passed since Mark O'Connell walked through that door and changed everything. 6 months of building something that felt, for the first time since her medical discharge, like it might actually last. Her phone buzzed. A text from Patricia Big asked, "Regional VA wants to expand the program statewide. Meeting in Austin next week." "You in?" Lena stared at the message, thumb hovering over the keyboard. Statewide meant more responsibility, more visibility, more chances to fail in ways that affected people beyond her small corner of the world. It meant standing in front of administrators and policymakers and proving that what she'd built here wasn't just luck or lightning in a bottle. She typed back, "Send me the details." Inside, May was already prepping the coffee station, her movements efficient, despite the early hour, and the arthritis she pretended didn't bother her. The wall of honor had grown to cover 3 full panels now, each one dense with photos and patches, and handwritten notes from veterans who'd found something here they hadn't found anywhere else. "You're thinking too loud," May said without turning around. "I can hear it from here. Patricia wants to expand the program, take it statewide." "Of course she does. What you've built works. Why wouldn't they want to replicate it?" "Because replicating something means I have to explain how it works, and I'm not sure I know." It just happened. One conversation, one connection at a time. May turned, fixing Lena with the look that had probably terrified her children and grandchildren into good behavior. You know exactly how it works. You showed up. You told the truth. You let people see you struggling and surviving at the same time. That's not luck, that's leadership. I'm not a leader. I'm just a decorated combat veteran who saved 17 lives, built a support network from nothing, and changed an entire community's understanding of what veterans need. Yeah, you're right. Definitely not leadership material. May's voice was dry as the planes outside. Lena opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. May had a point, even if accepting it felt like swallowing glass. The morning rush came in waves. The Sandoval brothers, who now made a point of shaking Lena's hand every time they came in. Hank Morrison, who'd started volunteering at the local VA clinic after watching what Lena had built. A new-face young woman, early 20s, with a Marine Corps tattoo visible on her forearm, and eyes that held the particular exhaustion of someone recently separated from service. The woman chose a corner booth and hunched over the menu like she was trying to disappear into it. Lena recognized the posture immediately. She'd worn it herself for 3 years. She approached with coffee and a gentle voice. First time here? Yeah, just passing through. The woman's accent was Southern Georgia or Alabama. Saw the sign about the Wall of Honor. Thought I'd check it out. You serve 4 years. Got out 3 months ago. Still figuring out what that means. Lena set down the coffee. What's your name? Corporal. The woman stopped herself. Sorry, Hannah Briggs. I'm Lena, Sergeant Lena Torres. Marines Iraq discharged 2008. She watched Hannah's shoulders ease slightly at the shared identity. You stationed nearby? Was at Camp Pendleton. From Georgia originally. Thought about going home, but Hannah shrugged. Didn't feel like home anymore. So I'm just driving, seeing where the road takes me. You looking for work? Eventually. Right now, I'm just trying to figure out how to be a person again. Lena pulled out her order pad and wrote down a number. This is my cell. I run a peer support program for veterans in this area. We help with job placement, VA navigation, just general reintegration stuff. And we meet Thursday nights at the VFW in Midland if you want to connect with other people who get it. Hannah stared at the number like it might bite her. I don't know. I'm not really a group person. Neither was I. Still went. Turns out it helps. Lena tapped the paper. No pressure. But if you need something, a place to stay, help with paperwork, just someone to talk to who understands that number works. Why are you doing this? You don't even know me. Someone did it for me when I needed it. I'm just passing it forward. She left Hannah to decide and moved on to other tables, but kept an eye on the corner booth. The young woman sat there for 2 hours, nursing coffee and staring at that piece of paper. Finally, she pulled out her phone and took a photo of the number. It wasn't a call, wasn't even a commitment, but it was something. A door left open instead of slammed shut. Hannah left a $5 tip on an $8 check and paused at the Wall of Honor on her way out. Lena watched her trace the edges of a patch from 3rd Battalion 5th Marines, Lena's old unit, with something like longing in her face. Then she walked out into the cold morning, and Lena wondered if she'd ever see her again. She did. 3 days later, Hannah showed up at the Thursday night support group, sitting in the back with her arms crossed and her walls up high. Bobby welcomed her the same way he'd welcomed Lena 6 months ago. No pressure, no expectations, just space to exist. The session that night focused on employment challenges. A guy named Marcus, Army Infantry, was struggling with interviews. They see the resume gap, ask what I was doing, and when I say military service, they get weird, like they don't know whether to thank me or worry I'm going to snap and shoot up the office. What do you tell them? Alex asked. The truth. That I was deployed, that I have skills they need, leadership, logistics, crisis management. But I can see it in their faces. They're scared of me. That's their problem, not yours, Bobby said. But it's a problem that affects you, so we need to work around it. Anyone have strategies? Focus on transferable skills without using military jargon, Lena offered. Don't say led a fire team. Say managed a team of 4 in high-pressure situations requiring split-second decision-making. Same thing, different language. I tried that. Still didn't get the job. Then they weren't the right employer. We've got a list of veteran-friendly companies in the area. Let me connect you with a few. Someone's looking for exactly what you bring. After the meeting, Hannah approached Lena hesitantly. That thing you said about passing it forward, how do I do that? I don't have money to donate or connections to share. I barely have my shit together. You show up. That's it. You show up here. You tell your story when you're ready. You listen to other people's stories. Every person who walks through that door and sees you surviving, that's passing it forward. That's it. Just exist. Just exist visibly. It's harder than it sounds. Hannah's laugh was bitter. Yeah, I'm getting that. Over the next month, Lena watched Hannah slowly unfold. She started sleeping in her car in the diner parking lot, and May pretended not to notice while making sure there was always leftover soup going bad that needed eating. Lena helped her apply for VA benefits and connected her with a transitional housing program. Sarah, the young Army vet, who now worked full-time at the diner, offered Hannah shifts, washing dishes until something better came through. It was the same pattern Lena had seen play out dozens of times now. A veteran adrift, disconnected, convinced they had to figure everything out alone. The community slowly surrounding them with support that looked like friendship, like coincidence, like anything except charity. And then gradually, the walls coming down and the person underneath emerging. In February, the Austin meeting happened. Lena drove 5 hours to the state capitol and sat in a conference room with 20 VA administrators, all of them looking at her expectantly. Patricia had warned her they'd want data metrics, proof that the peer support model could scale. But Lena had come prepared with something better than numbers. She'd brought stories. Hannah Briggs was sleeping in her car 2 months ago, Lena said, standing at the front of the room, with PowerPoint slides she'd agonized over for days. 23 years old, 4 years of service, medically discharged with PTSD after a convoy attack in Syria. She had $600 to her name and no idea how to access her benefits. Today she's working full-time, enrolled in community college, and mentoring 2 other veterans who are where she was. That's what peer support looks like. She clicked to the next slide. Marcus Thompson Army Infantry 3 deployments. Couldn't get hired because civilian employers didn't understand his skills. We connected him with a veteran-friendly logistics company. He's now a warehouse supervisor, making $45,000 a year with benefits and training 2 other veteran employees. That's what veteran-friendly employment looks like. Slide after slide, story after story. The administrators took notes, asked questions, pushed back on scalability concerns. Could this model work in urban areas? How would they fund it? What training would peer mentors need? How would they measure success? Success isn't a metric, Lena said when they pressed for numbers. Success is a veteran calling the crisis line instead of loading a gun. Success is someone showing up to their kid's baseball game because they've learned to manage their triggers. Success is a woman walking into a diner with scars on her face and people treating her like a human being instead of a problem. You can't put that in a spreadsheet, but you can see it in reduced suicide rates, increased employment, decreased substance abuse. The data exists, but the data only matters because there are people behind it. The room went quiet. Then one administrator, a woman in her 50s with a military pin on her lapel, spoke up. You're absolutely right. And that's why we're proposing a pilot program in 5 Texas cities: Austin, Houston, San Antonio, El Paso, and Fort Worth. We want you to train the coordinators, develop the curriculum, and oversee implementation. Lena felt her stomach drop. I'm not qualified to oversee a program that large. You built the template. You understand what works. And you have the credibility with veteran communities that we can't manufacture. Will you do it? She thought about Hannah sleeping in her car, about Marcus being turned down for jobs he was overqualified for, about all the veterans out there who were one connection away from finding their way back but had no one to make that connection, about Mark O'Connell standing up in a diner and refusing to let cruelty go unchallenged. Yes, she heard herself say, I'll do it. The expansion happened fast. By March, Lena was traveling 2 days a week, training coordinators in different cities, adapting the model to fit urban environments and different veteran demographics. It was exhausting pulling her away from the diner and the Thursday night meetings and the daily connections that had sustained her. But it was also exhilarating seeing the network grow beyond anything she'd imagined. May hired another waitress to cover Lena's reduced schedule. The woman was a Navy veteran, quiet and competent, and within 2 weeks, the Wall of Honor had expanded again to include Navy memorabilia. The diner was becoming known statewide now. Veterans made pilgrimages to see it, to add their own patches and photos, to sit in the space where respect wasn't conditional and dignity wasn't negotiable. In April, Mark called with news. Michelle's company is transferring her to Dallas. We're moving to Texas. You're kidding. Dead serious. She took a promotion, couldn't pass it up. We'll be there by June, which means I can actually visit this magical diner I keep hearing about, instead of just seeing photos. It's not magical. It's just. Lena paused. Okay, maybe it's a little magical. I'm bringing the girls. They've been asking about the woman who saved their dad's life. Fair warning. Emily's planning to interview you for a school project about unsung heroes. I'm not a hero. We've had this argument. You lost. Deal with it. When they moved to Dallas in June, Mark made the 3-hour drive to the diner on his first weekend. He brought Michelle, a black woman with warm eyes, and an MBA who'd somehow managed to love a broken Marine back to wholeness, and the girls who were exactly as Mark had described them. Emily serious and prepared with a list of interview questions. Sarah bouncing with energy and asking if Lena had ever shot anyone. Sarah, Michelle said sharply. It's okay, Lena said. I did, yeah. It's part of combat. Not something I'm proud of, but something that was necessary. Did it feel bad? Sarah asked with the blunt curiosity of 13. Yeah, still does sometimes. That's normal, feeling bad about things that had to be done. It means you haven't lost your humanity. Emily recorded the interview on her phone, asking thoughtful questions about what drove Lena to become a medic, what the hardest part of deployment was, how she dealt with coming home. At the end, she asked, "Do you think you made a difference?" Lena looked at Mark, who was watching his daughters with pride, and thought about the 19 years of life he'd had because she'd run into fire. I think I made a difference to the people I saved. Whether that matters in the bigger scheme, I don't know. But it mattered to them, and that's enough. After lunch, Mark walked with Lena to the Wall of Honor. He stood in front of it for a long time, studying the faces and names and memories assembled there. You did this, he said finally. You took one moment of recognition and built something that's changing lives. You know that, right? I had help. Stop deflecting. You're allowed to be proud of what you've built. I'm working on it. Work faster. Because Michelle's company has a Veterans Employment Initiative, and they want to partner with your program. That's thousands of potential jobs for veterans across Texas. But they want to meet with you first. Make sure the fit is right. Mark, no arguments. You're meeting with them. Next week in Dallas. I'll drive you up, you'll have a conversation, and you'll let them help you help veterans. It's happening. It happened. The partnership with Michelle's company opened doors Lena hadn't known existed. Other corporations followed, wanting to prove their veteran-friendly credentials, and suddenly, the program had funding for full-time coordinators in 10 cities, a training academy for peer mentors, and partnerships with community colleges, offering free courses to veterans. The Thursday night support group in Midland swelled to 40 regular attendees. They had to move to a bigger space, a community center, that donated the room because they believed in the work. Bobby asked Lena to co-facilitate, and even though she still felt unqualified, she said yes. Hannah Briggs completed her first semester of community college with a 3.8 GPA and became a peer mentor herself, working with women veterans who were where she'd been 6 months ago. Marcus Thompson's company hired 3 more veterans on his recommendation. Chad Pike's crew raised another $12,000 for the VA and started a quarterly tradition of fundraising for different veteran causes. The ripples spread outward, each small act of connection, creating more connections. Each story of recovery, inspiring others to believe recovery was possible. It wasn't perfect. Veterans still struggled, still fell through cracks, still lost battles with addiction and depression, and the weight of memories that wouldn't quiet. But now, when they fell, there were hands to catch them, voices to remind them they weren't alone, systems to support them instead of abandoning them. In September, Lena got a call from a producer at a national news network. They wanted to do a feature story on the diner and the veteran support network that had grown from it. She'd turned down these requests before, but this time the producer said something that changed her mind. We're doing a series on community-driven solutions to veteran issues, not just problems but solutions. Real people making real differences without waiting for government programs to catch up. Your story isn't just inspiring, it's replicable. And if we can show other communities how it's done, maybe we can help veterans everywhere. I don't want this to be about me, Lena said. It's not about you. It's about what you've built. And you can make sure we tell it right, that we focus on the community, the connections, the systems that work. We'll follow your lead. She agreed with conditions. They could film at the diner, but they had to include May and the other veterans who made the space what it was. They could interview her, but they had to interview Hannah and Marcus and Bobby too. And they couldn't use her scars as tragedy porn. She'd talk about them honestly, but she wouldn't be reduced to them. The crew came in October, spending 3 days filming. They captured the morning rush at the diner, the Thursday night support group interviews with veterans whose lives had changed. They filmed the Wall of Honor and asked people to talk about what the patches and photos meant to them. When the segment aired in November, it was 6 minutes long, an eternity in television time. It opened with Lena serving coffee, her scars visible, her movements efficient. The voiceover talked about her service, her injuries, the years of isolation. Then it cut to Mark O'Connell, talking about the day he recognized her tattoo and decided silence wasn't an option. I could have said nothing, Mark told the camera. Could have finished my breakfast and left. But if I'd done that, Lena would still be hiding. Chad Pike and his crew would still be cruel. And none of this, he gestured at the Wall of Honor, at the bustle of the diner, would exist. One moment of choosing to speak up instead of staying quiet. That's all it took to start something that's now helping thousands of veterans. The segment ended with Lena sitting in a booth across from Hannah Briggs, both of them drinking coffee, both of them laughing at something off camera. The final voiceover said, "In a small West Texas diner, a community decided that silence wasn't acceptable, that veterans deserved dignity without having to prove they'd earned it. That connection was stronger than isolation. And from that decision, a movement was born." The response was immediate and overwhelming. The diner's phone rang non-stop, with veterans asking how to start similar programs in their communities. The VA program received funding requests from 12 additional states. Patricia's office was flooded with applications from veterans wanting to become peer mentors. And Lena's cell phone, the number she'd given to Hannah on that piece of paper 9 months ago, became a hotline for veterans across the country looking for guidance, support, or just someone who understood. She hired an assistant to help manage the volume, created a website with resources and templates for communities wanting to replicate the model, developed a training program that could be delivered online so people didn't have to travel. The work expanded beyond anything she'd imagined, and every day she woke up exhausted and energized in equal measure. In December, 1 year after that first Christmas, when Chad Pike had brought her the job opportunities envelope, Lena stood in the diner during the annual holiday party they'd started throwing for veterans. The space was packed 70 people, maybe more, all of them connected through the network she'd helped build. May found her in the kitchen, taking a moment to breathe. "You doing okay?" "Just overwhelmed. In a good way, I think." "You should be proud. Look what you've created." "I didn't create it. It created itself. I just showed up." That's leadership, honey. Showing up when it matters and trusting other people to do the same. May squeezed her shoulder. "Your sister called earlier. Said she's coming down for New Year's. Wants to see what all the fuss is about." Lena hadn't seen her sister in 2 years. They'd grown apart after Lena's discharge, the gap between their lives too wide to bridge through occasional phone calls. But maybe now, with purpose and community replacing isolation, that gap could narrow. "She can meet everyone," Lena said. "See what her drunk bridesmaid story started." May laughed. "You're still telling that story. It saved a man's life. Of course I'm still telling it." Back in the main room, Hannah was teaching a group of new veterans how to navigate the VA benefits system. Marcus was talking to a corporate recruiter about veteran hiring. Bobby was coordinating carpools for people who'd traveled from other cities. And scattered throughout dozens of conversations were happening veterans connecting with each other, sharing stories, offering support, building the networks that made survival possible. Alex appeared at Lena's elbow. "Hey, I need to ask you something." "What's up?" "The Women Veterans Retreat is happening again in January. They want you to be a keynote speaker. Talk about building community, about leadership, about..." She gestured vaguely. "Whatever this is that you've done." "I don't do speeches." "You did that TV interview. You train coordinators. You run support groups. You do speeches. You just call them something else." "That's different. Those are conversations." "So have a conversation with 100 women who need to hear what you have to say." Alex's expression was serious. "You changed my life, Lena. You showed me that the stuff I went through didn't have to define me forever. Let other people see that too." Lena wanted to refuse, wanted to retreat into the background and let someone else carry the weight of visibility. But she thought about that moment in the diner when Mark had stood up and refused to let cruelty pass unchallenged, about the choice he'd made to speak instead of staying silent, about the ripples that single moment had created. "Okay," she said. "I'll do it." As the party continued around her, Lena found herself at the wall of honor studying the faces accumulated there. So many stories, so much pain and courage and resilience. Each one a reminder that service continued long after the uniform came off, that the battles veterans fought at home were often harder than the ones they'd fought overseas, and that none of them had to fight alone. Her phone buzzed. A text from Mark. "Emily's project won first place at the regional competition. They want to submit it to nationals. She wanted you to know." Lena smiled and typed back, "Tell her I'm proud of her, and thank you for everything. Thank you for saving my life, for building this, for showing everyone what happens when one person decides silence isn't acceptable." She pocketed the phone and returned to the party, to her community, to the life she'd built from the ashes of who she'd been before. The scars were still there. They would always be there. But they were no longer the whole story. They were simply part of the journey, visible proof that she'd survived, that she'd fought, that she'd refused to let the fire consume everything she was. And in the end, that refusal had made all the difference. The January morning felt different from all the others that had come before. Lena drove through the hill country toward the women veterans retreat with the windows cracked, letting cold air sharpen her thoughts. In the passenger seat sat a folder containing notes she'd made and discarded a dozen times, each attempt to capture what she wanted to say, falling short of what she actually felt. Alex had texted that morning, "Just be yourself. That's all anyone needs." But being herself meant being vulnerable in front of 100 women she'd never met, admitting to struggles she still hadn't fully resolved, offering hope she wasn't always sure she believed in. It meant standing in front of people and saying, "I don't have all the answers, but I'm still here, and that counts for something." The retreat center sat nestled in the hills, a collection of cabins around a main lodge with views that stretched for miles. Women were already arriving, pulling duffel bags from trucks, greeting each other with the particular shorthand of people who'd served. Different branches, different eras, different wars, but the same recognition in their eyes. Teresa, the Air Force veteran who'd spoken at the bonfire last year, met Lena at the registration desk. "Glad you're here. Nervous? Terrified? Good. Means you care." Teresa handed her a name tag and a schedule. "You're on at 10 tomorrow morning. Tonight's just social stuff, dinner, bonfire, getting to know people. Try to relax." Relaxing proved impossible. Everywhere Lena turned, women wanted to talk to her. They'd seen the news segment, heard about the diner, read articles about the peer support program. They had questions about starting similar initiatives in their communities, about navigating VA bureaucracy, about how she'd found the courage to stop hiding. "I'm not sure I found courage," Lena admitted to a group gathered around the dinner table. "I think someone else found it for me, and I just decided to stop running from it." "That Marine who recognized your tattoo," a Navy veteran named Carmen said. "What made him speak up? Most people just look the other way." I asked him that once. He said silence felt like betrayal, that he owed me more than that. Lena pushed food around her plate. "But I think it was bigger than just owing me. I think he was tired of watching veterans get treated like we're damaged goods. Tired of the gap between what people say they believe about supporting veterans and how they actually treat us." "So what changed that day?" Carmen pressed. "In the diner, after he stood up, what actually shifted?" Lena thought about it, trying to articulate something she'd felt more than understood. People needed permission. Permission to see past the scars. Permission to acknowledge service. Permission to care. Mark gave them that permission by going first. He made it okay to stop pretending everything was fine. "And now you're giving other people that permission," Teresa said quietly. "That's what all this is, the program, the diner, the wall of honor. You're telling people it's okay to be seen okay, to struggle okay, to need help. That's radical in a culture that tells veterans to shut up and soldier on." The bonfire that night drew nearly everyone, and the conversations flowed like water finding its level. Women talked about their service, their transitions, the specific ways the world failed to make space for them. They talked about sexual trauma and combat injuries, and the exhaustion of constantly having to prove they'd earned their place. And through it all, Lena listened, absorbing their stories, like someone gathering kindling for a fire she'd need to tend later. A young woman couldn't have been more than 25. Army recent discharge, sat next to Lena and said nothing for a long time. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely audible over the crackling flames. "I don't know how to do this. How to be a person again. I thought I did, but every day just feels like I'm pretending to be someone I'm not. Someone who fits in civilian life. And I'm so tired of pretending." What if you stopped? Lena asked. Stopped what? Pretending. What if you just showed up as exactly who you are? Someone who served, who's struggling, who doesn't have it all figured out. What if that was enough? It's not enough. People don't want to deal with that. They want the version of me that's easy and uncomplicated. Some people, yeah. But the people who matter, the ones who are going to actually help you build a life worth living, those people need to see the real you, complications and all. Lena rolled up her sleeve, letting the firelight play across her scars. I spent 3 years hiding these, hiding myself. And you know what it got me? Isolation, depression, and a job where people mocked me daily. The minute I stopped hiding, the minute I let someone see who I really was, everything changed. What if I let people see, and they can't handle it? Then they're not your people. And you keep looking until you find the ones who can. Lena met her eyes. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm saying it's necessary. Because the alternative is spending your whole life performing for an audience that doesn't actually care about you. The young woman nodded slowly, and Lena saw tears tracking down her face in the firelight. She didn't offer comfort or platitudes. Just sat there bearing witness to the pain, letting it exist without trying to fix it. That night in her cabin, Lena threw away her prepared notes and started writing from the heart. Not a speech, but a letter. To Hannah, to Marcus, to every veteran she'd worked with over the past year. To the version of herself who'd stood in that diner 3 years ago, convinced that invisibility was safety. She wrote until 2 in the morning, and when she finally slept, she dreamed not of fire, but of hands reaching across distances, connecting, holding on. The next morning, she stood in front of 100 women with her handwritten letter and nothing else. No PowerPoint, no statistics, no carefully crafted talking points. Just the truth, raw and unpolished. I'm going to tell you about the worst day of my life, she began. And then I'm going to tell you about the best day. And somewhere between those 2 days is everything I've learned about survival and purpose and what it means to keep serving after you take off the uniform. She told them about the IED in Fallujah, about pulling the truck commander from the burning vehicle and the fireball that caught them both, about waking up in the burn unit 2 weeks later to learn he hadn't made it, that all her pain had been for nothing, about the 3 years of isolation that followed the belief that she was broken beyond repair, the careful invisibility she'd cultivated like armor. And then one morning, a stranger walked into the diner where I worked and saw my unit tattoo. And instead of looking away, instead of letting the cruelty I was experiencing happen unchallenged, he stood up. He told everyone who I was, what I'd done, why it mattered. And for the first time since I'd gotten out, I felt like maybe I wasn't just the sum of my scars. The room was absolutely silent. That was the best day. Not because someone called me a hero, I'm not comfortable with that word, but because someone saw me, really saw me, and he made it impossible for anyone else in that room to unsee what he'd shown them. Lena looked out at the faces watching her, saw recognition and pain and hope intermingled. Here's what I learned from that day. We're all waiting for permission. Permission to struggle. Permission to ask for help. Permission to admit that we're not okay. And we're so desperate for that permission that we'll stay silent and suffer rather than risk being the first one to speak up. She held up her scarred hands. These tell a story about service and sacrifice and survival. But for 3 years I treated them like something shameful, something to hide. Because I'd internalized the message that scars, visible or invisible, were evidence of weakness. That if I couldn't be the person I was before Iraq, I had no value. But here's the truth. I wish someone had told me sooner. You don't have to be who you were before. You're allowed to be changed by what you experienced. Changed isn't the same as broken. And the version of you that exists now, scarred, struggling, figuring it out as you go, that version has value too. A woman in the third row raised her hand. How do you convince yourself of that, when everything around you says otherwise? You don't convince yourself alone. You find people who see your value even when you can't. You build community with others who understand. You show up even when it's hard, even when you're scared, and you let yourself be seen. And slowly over time, you start to believe what they see in you. Another hand. What about the days when showing up feels impossible, when the weight is too heavy? Then you don't show up. You rest. You ask for help. You call someone from your support network and say, I can't do this today. And you trust that the community you've built will hold you until you can stand again. Lena's voice was steady. That's what community means. Not that you never fall, but that when you do, there are hands to catch you. For the next hour, she answered questions. About building the program, about navigating resistance from people who didn't understand veteran issues, about dealing with the weight of other people's trauma while managing her own. She talked about the mistakes she'd made, taking on too much, not setting boundaries, letting the work consume her until May forced her to take vacation days. I'm not a perfect model for this, she said honestly. I'm still figuring it out, still having days where I want to hide. Still dealing with nightmares and triggers, and the particular exhaustion that comes from carrying memories that won't quiet. But I'm doing it in community now instead of alone. And that makes all the difference. When the session ended, women lined up to talk to her, to share their own stories, to ask for advice, to simply say thank you for being honest about the struggle. Carmen, the Navy veteran from dinner, pressed a piece of paper into her hand. My daughter's applying to West Point next year. I haven't told her much about my service, didn't want to scare her off. But after hearing you talk, I think maybe I should. Think maybe she needs to know the truth about what service costs and why it's still worth it. Tell her, Lena said. Tell her everything, the good and the bad. She deserves to make an informed choice. Will you talk to her if she wants? She's asking questions I don't know how to answer. Of course. Have her call me. The young woman from the bonfire found Lena at lunch. I wanted you to know I called my mom this morning. First time I've talked to her in 8 months. Told her I wasn't okay, that I needed help. And she... Her voice cracked. She said she'd been waiting for me to ask, that she wanted to help, but didn't know how. That's good. That's really good. I have a long way to go, but I think I can do it now, knowing I don't have to pretend. You never had to, but I'm glad you know it now. The retreat continued through the afternoon with workshops and activities, but Lena found herself drawn to the quiet spaces between organized events, the one-on-one conversations by the lake, the small groups processing what they'd heard, the gradual building of connections that would outlast the weekend. That evening, Teresa found her on the lodge porch, watching the sunset paint the hills purple and gold. You did good today. Really good. I just told the truth. That's what made it good. No bullshit, no platitudes, just here's what happened, here's what I learned, here's how we help each other. Teresa sat down beside her. You know what you've built, right? Not just the program or the diner stuff. You've built a template for how veterans can help veterans, for how communities can support us without making it weird. That's going to outlive you. That's legacy work. I'm 36. Little early to talk about legacy. Legacy isn't about death. It's about impact. And you've already created impact that's going to ripple forward for decades. Teresa pulled out her phone, showed Lena a photo. My daughter, 20 years old, joining the Air Force next month. She's nervous about what comes after service, about whether she'll be able to transition back. But I showed her the news segment about you, told her about what you've built. And she said, if people like that exist, if there's support like that waiting, then I'm not scared. Lena felt something break open in her chest. Tell her to call me. When she gets out, whenever that is. Tell her there's a community waiting. I will. And thank you for showing my daughter that service doesn't have to end when you take off the uniform, that there's purpose waiting on the other side if you're willing to look for it. The drive home on Sunday felt different from the drive out. Lena carried with her the weight of other people's stories, their hopes and fears, and the trust they'd placed in her by sharing them. But she also carried something lighter, the knowledge that she wasn't alone in this work. That all across the country, veterans were building similar networks, creating similar spaces of support and recognition. May was at the diner when Lena arrived Monday morning, even though it was her day off. How was the retreat? Intense. Good. I think I made a difference. Of course you did. You always do. May handed her an envelope. This came for you Saturday. Looks official. Inside was a letter from the VA, formal and bureaucratic. Lena skimmed it once, then read it again slowly to make sure she understood. They want to make the program permanent, she said, looking up at May. Full federal funding, national expansion. They're creating a new position, National Director of Peer Support Programs, and they're offering it to me. That's incredible. Are you going to take it? I don't know. It would mean leaving here. Leaving the diner, the Thursday night group, everything I've built locally. Or it would mean expanding everything you've built so more people can benefit. Lena, honey, you've outgrown this small corner of Texas. That's not a bad thing, that's success. The question is whether you're brave enough to let yourself grow with it. What about you, the diner? The diner will be fine. I've got Sarah. I've got the new girl. I've got a whole community of people who believe in what we're doing here. You built the foundation. Let other people maintain it while you go build something bigger. Lena sat down hard in the nearest booth, the letter still in her hands. A year and a half ago, she'd been a waitress who hid her scars and took abuse in silence. Now the VA wanted to put her in charge of veteran programs nationwide. The gap between those two versions of herself felt impossibly wide. Her phone rang. Mark. Did you get a letter from the VA? He asked without preamble. How did you know? Because they called me, asked for a reference. I told them you were the most qualified person in America for this job, and if they didn't hire you, they were idiots. His voice was warm with pride. So, are you going to take it? I'm terrified. Good. That means it matters. What does your gut say? Lena closed her eyes, listening to the sound of the diner around her. The coffee machine gurgling, May humming as she prepped vegetables, the door chiming as early customers arrived. This place had saved her, had given her a reason to keep going when everything else felt pointless. But maybe it had saved her so she could go save others. My gut says yes, she admitted, but my brain is listing about 1,000 reasons why I'm going to fail. Your brain is an asshole. Listen to your gut. Mark paused. Michelle and I talked about this. If you take the job, you'll need to be based in DC for at least part of the time. We have a guest room, standing invitation. Use it whenever you need. You don't have to do that. I know. I want to. You saved my life, Lena. Let me help you build yours. She called Patricia Chen next. Did you know about this? I wrote your recommendation letter. Of course I knew. Patricia's voice was matter of fact. You're the right person for this job, not just because of what you've accomplished, but because you understand the work from the inside. You've lived it. That perspective is invaluable. What if I screw it up? Then you'll learn and do better, same as you've done with everything else. Lena, perfection isn't the goal. Progress is, and you've proven you can create progress. That night, Lena sat in her apartment, the one she'd slowly transformed from a cave into a home, and thought about the choice in front of her. Stay safe in the world she'd built, or step into the unknown and try to build something bigger. Stay invisible, or accept that visibility came with responsibility. She thought about Hannah sleeping in her car, about Marcus struggling to find work, about the young woman at the bonfire, who'd been so tired of pretending. She thought about all the veterans out there who needed someone to see them, to give them permission to struggle, to show them that community was possible. And she thought about Mark O'Connell, standing up in a diner and refusing to let silence be the answer. She called the number on the letter. "This is Lena Torres. I'm calling about the national director position. I'd like to accept." The next 3 months were a whirlwind of transition. Finding an apartment in D.C., hiring a team developing curriculum for a national program, testifying before congressional committees about veteran needs. Lena traveled constantly, setting up programs in new cities, training coordinators, speaking at conferences. But she came back to the diner as often as she could. Came back for Thursday night support groups, for Sunday morning breakfast with the veteran community, for the quiet moments at the counter with May, where no words were necessary. On a Tuesday morning in May, almost 2 years to the day after Mark had first walked through the door, Lena stood in front of the Wall of Honor with her sister Julia. They hadn't seen each other since before the retreat, and Julia had driven 12 hours to visit the place that had changed Lena's life. "I still can't believe this is what you do now," Julia said, studying the photos and patches. "When you got out, you were so..." She stopped, searching for words. "You were drowning, and we didn't know how to help. I didn't know how to ask for help. And now you teach other people how. I teach them it's okay to need it. That's different." Lena traced the edge of a photo, her old platoon, all of them young and fierce. "You know what's funny? That story I told Mark in the drainage ditch, about your wedding, the drunk bridesmaids, he said it saved his life. My disaster of a wedding saved someone's life. It gave him something to hold on to, something normal and human and real. It reminded him there was a world beyond the fire and blood. That's what community does, reminds us. There's more to life than survival." Julia wrapped an arm around Lena's shoulders. "I'm proud of you, for building this, for not giving up. I wanted to give up, so many times. But you didn't. That's what counts." That afternoon, the diner hosted a celebration for the program's expansion. Veterans came from across Texas, some traveling hours to be there. The space filled with people Lena had helped, people she'd connected, people who'd found their way back because someone had shown them it was possible. Mark and his family drove down from Dallas. Hannah brought her girlfriend, a detail she'd been nervous to share until Lena told her nobody cared who she loved, only that she was happy. Bobby organized the logistics like a military operation, and May coordinated enough food to feed an army. As the party buzzed around her, Lena found herself pulled into a corner by a teenager, couldn't have been more than 16, wearing a military family support t-shirt. "My dad's deploying next month," the kid said. "Marines heading to the Middle East. I'm scared something's going to happen to him. That he'll come back different. Or not come back at all." Lena crouched down to eye level. "What's your name?" "Jesse. My dad says you saved someone like him once. Someone who got hurt." "I tried to help people who got hurt, yeah. That was my job." "If my dad gets hurt, will someone like you be there?" "There are medics deploying with every unit. People who trained hard and care deeply about bringing everyone home safe. Your dad will have people looking out for him." "But what if..." Jesse's voice cracked. "What if he comes back and he's not the same? What if he's broken? Then he won't be broken. He'll be changed. And change can be hard, but it's not the same as broken. And if he needs help adjusting, if he needs support or treatment, or just someone who understands, there are people like me all over the country now. Communities ready to help him find his way back. Promise. I promise. And when he deploys, you give me his name and unit. I'll make sure the right people know to watch out for him. Okay? Jesse nodded, wiping at tears, and Lena pulled the kid into a hug. This was the work now. Not just helping veterans who'd already struggled, but building systems so fewer would have to struggle alone. Creating communities where service was honored, and wounds visible or invisible were treated with dignity instead of judgment. As the sun set and the party began to wind down, Lena stood outside the diner with Mark watching the highway stretch toward distant horizons. "You thinking about the next thing?" Mark asked. "Always. Can't seem to turn it off anymore." That's leadership. Never satisfied with good enough, always seeing what could be better. Or it's just worrying with a different label. Call it whatever you want. It's working. He gestured at the diner behind them, lit up warm against the darkening sky. You know what the best part of all this is? It's not the programs or the funding or even the lives saved, though those matter. It's that you made it okay for people to be human again, to struggle and hurt and ask for help without shame. That's revolutionary. It shouldn't be revolutionary. It should be basic decency. Should be, yeah. But it's not. So we make it normal. One conversation, one connection at a time, until the world catches up with what should have been true all along. They stood in comfortable silence, and Lena thought about the journey from that morning 2 years ago to this moment. About the distance she'd traveled not in miles, but in understanding. About the person she'd been broken and hiding and the person she'd become. Not healed exactly, not whole in the way she'd once been whole, but functional, purposeful, connected to something larger than herself. The door opened behind them, and May stuck her head out. "Lena, there's someone here asking for you. Says he saw the news story and drove 5 hours to meet you." Inside, a man in his 50s stood nervously by the counter, a duffel bag at his feet. He had the look of someone recently unhoused, recently adrift. "I'm sorry to bother you," he said when Lena approached. "I'm a veteran, Vietnam. Been on the streets for 15 years. Saw your story on the news and thought..." He stopped, swallowed hard. "I thought maybe if I came here, maybe someone could help me find my way back." Lena looked at May, who was already reaching for the phone to call Sarah about picking up an extra shift. Looked at Bobby, who was pulling up the VA housing resources on his phone. Looked at Hannah, who was clearing a booth and gesturing the man to sit down. This was the community she'd built. Not perfect, not capable of solving every problem, but present, ready, willing to show up when someone asked for help. "What's your name?" Lena asked the man. David Patterson, 1st Cavalry Division, 69 to 71. "Welcome home, David. Let's get you some coffee and figure out what you need." As she poured the coffee black, he said, "Always black," and sat down across from a stranger who'd traveled 5 hours on the hope that someone might see him, might help him, might give him a chance to be more than his circumstances. Lena realized this was the answer to the question she'd been asking since she woke up in that burn unit all those years ago. What was worth the pain? What made survival meaningful? This moment of connection. This act of showing up for someone who needed it. This community that caught people when they fell and helped them stand again. This revolution of basic human decency built one conversation at a time. The scars on her arms caught the diner lights as she reached for the sugar dispenser. She didn't pull her sleeves down, didn't hide. Just let them exist as part of her story, proof that she'd survived, that she'd fought, that she'd refused to let the fire consume everything she was and might still become. And in the end, that refusal, that stubborn insistence on being seen, on building community, on believing that connection was stronger than isolation, had made all the difference. Not just for her, but for everyone who'd found their way to this small diner on Highway 87 and discovered that they didn't have to carry their wounds alone. That dignity wasn't something you had to earn through service, but that service deserved honor when it was given. That the distance between invisible and visible was just one person brave enough to refuse silence, and another person brave enough to be seen. Some heroes wore capes. Others just showed up with coffee and scars, and the willingness to say, "I see you. You matter. Let me help." And sometimes that was enough to change the world.